Hey, Mrparka here to review a new one from Intervision. This just came out, I believe, January 10th, 11th. Last Tuesday. This is Murderlust by Donald Jones. Donald Jones did a bunch of other movies like Love Butcher and I believe Schoolgirls in Chains. This also has the bonus feature directed by Donald Jones, Project Nightmare. Now, these movies are both written by the same writer, and there's a commentary with the writer on both the features, partial on Project Nightmare. Okay, let's get into Murderlust. By the way, this is one of those old school covers that you'd see in the video store you'd actually love. You'd get home, and then this scene's not even in the movie. But happy to report, just like Mutant Hunt, that scene is actually in the movie, a scene very similar to it. The film follows a psychopath named Steve Belmont. And he plays like a serial killer's greatest hits. He's like part Kenneth Bianca from the Hillside Strangler, and he also feels a lot like Dennis Rader and Gary Ridgway, who hadn't even been caught by when this movie was made. He lives a double life, and half of his life he's kind of this alcoholic loser that can't keep a job. But his double life, he's this youth church counselor, and he's very beloved and respected. So we get this kind of menacing quality about him, where sometimes he's really charming, and other times he's just a sleazeball. And I believe it's fairly accurate in portraying a serial killer. When you read about him or you hear things about him, they all kind of line up. The writer did a pretty good job fleshing this character out and made a pretty solid script. The film is kind of virtually bloodless except for the ending, which is kind of odd with, that kind of, you would think 80s and like a serial killer or maybe a slasher. It's nothing like a slasher movie. A little bit, but not really. It doesn't feel like a slasher movie. But yeah, virtually bloodless. They do a lot of editing techniques where they kind of suggest the murder, and they don't show it off screen, but it works for the most part. I think it does. There are some murders on screen. It kind of plays like how Henry doesn't necessarily show them all. You just see the girl and him talking, and then you see like a newspaper clipping, stuff like that. The guy who plays Steve Belmont does a really great job. I think he's probably the highlight in the acting department in the movie. The acting all around is fairly solid, and it goes well with the script, like I said. The synth score in here is kind of, of its time, and it works for the movie. I enjoy it. There's some really cool locations. I mean, they called in some favors. They shoot in like a church, and they get a lot of extras, so it doesn't look cheap. They also have, a store here and there in there. But the main location that actually shines in the movie is the desert. This guy has the moniker, the newspaper gave him, called the Mojave Murderer, So yeah, it's a little cheesy there, but they are kind of like that in the newspapers. So he dumps the bodies in the desert, and we get some really cool aerial shots that show the isolation and how this little van driving through with him, and it backs out, and you see, this is kind of scary. You're out in the middle of nowhere in his dumping ground with him. So yeah. I really enjoyed Murderlust. I thought it was I'm surprised I hadn't seen it. I thought it was a fairly solid serial killer movie, especially made at the time, where it has kind of a baddie that's realistic. There's times, too, when he's arguing with his boss at points where he has a little bit of a charming thing going on. Like, not charming, but he does charming when he's in the church and stuff like that with some of the adults. But he has this definite power thing where he needs to be in control. And there's also like scenes where he's arguing with his boss that are really kind of funny. And if he wasn't a psycho killer, you might actually like him a little bit, even though he is a loser. So there it goes. But he does feel like a serial killer's best of, I guess, if you want to put it that way, where he's kind of a mixture of a bunch of other previously established killers or killers who weren't established yet. So the writer did their homework, and they did a pretty good job. The commentary talks about how he studied the serial killers, and I noticed some similarities, and he talks about a lot of the locations and, working with the director, and it's a fairly good commentary. The other film on here, Project Nightmare, was released after this, but made before. I think it was the first time that Jones and the writer, James, had worked together. And this one is definitely plays like a 50s kind of hokey science fiction thriller movie. Isolation with like a kind of a computer mind game creation. All in all, it's really highly imaginative, but it is hokey, and for not doing there's a lot of things in it, but they don't really have all that many amazing effects. They have some lighting techniques here and there, changing filters, but all in all, for what it is, they did a pretty good job of keeping your interest in the movie. Like I said, though, it does play more like a 50s science fiction movie. And it's not awful, but it's worth the note of watching 1 or 2 times. And it's cool to see that these filmmakers can do something completely different than Murderlust, because Project Nightmare is. it does have that like 50s good natured hero, very Adam West type character in it. But yeah, this is a pretty nice release. There's also original trailer Murderlust on there, which actually is really great. It pops up and it's like the Hillside Strangler, the Boston Strangler, Jack the Ripper, and stuff like that, and it's like the killers, and it's a pretty cool scene. But yeah, Murderlust I'd really give a recommendation, especially if you like that like mid 80s kind of stuff, especially movies that maybe you haven't discovered yet. Fairly mean-spirited serial killer movie. But yeah, it is in widescreen presentation here. And my guess is this movie maybe was shot on film and then edited on tape, because or it's just kind of the best negatives they could do, because it isn't. Both the films are in widescreen, but they're DVD quality. They're not necessarily perfect, and although it's never pitch black or really horrible where you can't see what's going on, it does have some not the best. When you're used to Blu-ray, it's definitely not HD quality here. But yeah, it looks fairly good for what it is, and I imagine that it's a movie that was shot on film and edited on tape, but don't quote me on that. I'm Mr. Parka. Thank you very much for watching.